welcome everybody to another Sacred Wisdom podcast. In this podcast today, we are going to discuss the leaders of Tartaria, and I am joined with the magnificent Stephen Denman today, my brother. How you doing, Stephen?
I'm doing very well. I'm very busy, and I know that you're doing very well, and you're very creative and productive at the moment. So I know you've got a lot going on.
Always. And brilliant, Stephen. So we're going to discuss the leaders of Tartaria because there's a kind of a lot of misunderstanding with Tartaria. And I think one of the keys to Tartaria is they didn't really have a political system like we have in the West. And the way the kind of hierarchy of
No.
leaders, it was a very different process. So we're going to go into explaining this today, or Stephen's going to go into detail with all his amazing research he's done. And Stephen, so let's start with the leaders of Tartaria. Who were the leaders of Tartaria?
Well, they weren't. There wasn't any Tartarian emperors. That's the first disinformation that's been put out there by certain fake researchers who seem to be getting a lot of time being interviewed on various YouTube channels and so forth. And that information is totally incorrect. The timelines they're giving are completely incorrect. And as you said, the actual civilization of Great Tartaria, how it actually developed and evolved from early Tartaria, out of the collapse of the Mongol Empire and the Golden Horde of Temujin Khan or Genghis Khan, is very different, or shall we say radically different, than how you would sort of standardize and perceive any civilization from the conventionality of the historical narratives we see with the Sumerian Empire or the Akkadian Empire or the Babylonian Empire, the Assyrian Empire or the Greek Empire, the Roman Empire, and so on and so on. Or you can go over to, what happened with the Aztecs and the Mayans in Latin America and their civilizations. Tartaria was a uniquely non-debt based. It had no monetary system. It had no third-party debt usury. It didn't have local elections or state elections. It didn't have emperors. It did have, lineages in terms of bloodline royal families, but that was based on the idea of honoured genetic inheritance, the idea of using high morals and promoting and exemplifying, regal spirituality to the Nordic Tartarians and the various Turkic peoples who comprise the civilization of Great Tartaria and across many of the colonies of the Old World Empire. So if individual scholars or polymaths are going to look and say, well, there's no actual documented or evidential proof for Tartaria actually existing, to that extent, yes, there isn't that much proof because it cannot be measured academically as other civilizations have been measured, because it didn't have, shall we say, an integrated political, banking and monetary apparatus in place that could be used to define it and give it a sense of parameters and consideration. It was much more really etheric. It was incredibly supernal. And Great Tartaria and the Old World Empire most definitely existed, but not in the ways that we perceive. And you have a lot of individuals jumping on the educational bandwagon who want to make a name for themselves, saying that there was various Tartarian emperors. And what we've got to understand is when you look at the geographic expanses of what became the white cities in Great Tartaria, especially in northern Russia, we see along the Russian Arctic coast, there's the Barents Sea, you have the White Sea, Kara Sea, Laptev Sea, East Siberian Sea, and the Chukchi Sea. There were Tartarian kingdoms there, comprised of various white cities, but there were no Tartarian emperors. The fact is there were Tartarian kingdoms really in the Arctic Circle. They were across the Kola Peninsula, the Murmansk Oblast in northwestern Russia. They existed in the Polar Urals and the northern Urals of the Yamal-Nenets Autonomous Okrug in north-central Russia, as with the Baranga Mountains of the Taimyr Peninsula in north-central Russia, and across the vast central Siberian plateau and around the Kolyma Mountains or the Kalina Upland of the Chukotka Autonomous Okrug and the Magadan Oblast, and finally within the Kamchatka Peninsula in northeastern Russia. There were various Tartarian holdings, Tartarian kingdoms. or fiefdoms perhaps. But you had to remember there was a lot of nomadic kinds of existence going on amongst these Nordic Tartarians and also the Turkic peoples. So you didn't have this centralized, cohesive need, for the idea of a Tartarian emperor sitting on a gold and silver gemstone laden throne somewhere in some vast, crystal palace of radiant light, as some of these spectators, I call them spectators or commentators, because they don't have any real credible academic background. They don't do any kind of credible research. It's just merely ego wanting a name for itself.
So
what we do know is with the collapse of the Mongol Empire and the kind of dispersal of the Golden Horde and the end of the lineages, really that genetically related directly or indirectly to Temujin Khan or Genghis Khan, the founder of the Mongol Empire, process into the Russian Empire, but also much of that had originally come from Great Tartaria in the old world empire itself in northern Russia and in related locations across Eastern Europe and the Caucasus region. So, and we will come on to list some of the absurd individuals that are kind of presented as Tartarian emperors and give the specific timelines of when they were born and when they died or passed away, and to show the absolutely ridiculous gaps that are completely out of sync with actually the research of individuals. I mean, the idea that the collapse of Tartaria, the civilization of Great Tartaria occurred in, a Pacific year, say the 31st of January 1776 or the 31st of December 1776 as an example, stating that because, of the arising of the Bavarian Illuminati under Adam Weishaupt in Germany. There's no documented connectivity between any of that whatsoever. It's just supposition, and it's really bad historical research to do that, because it's making leaps and bounds towards assumptions that become sheer speculation and become quite absurd. So, but yeah, we will come on to talking about this list it's circulating all over the internet, and it's quite hilarious to actually see the names listed on there. And these white cities.
Just a point, Steve. Sorry, I just want to come in. I just want to mention about, because obviously we're always told with the version of history we're given that the Tartarians were nomads, and they were to a level, and this is what people need to understand. It's like what you're saying is that because of their political views and their their how they use money and used that as a system, it didn't slot in. So they were a type of nomad to the West. They were like to the Western people. With they couldn't relate to them. It was so far. It was such an old civilization.
So when you look at the Nordic Tartarians, who predominantly originated from Norway and Sweden, who had migrated into northern Russia, and then you take a look at the various Turkic peoples and the various Turkic groupings that defined that collective. So what you see is there are many medieval woodcuts, and many of those medieval woodcuts clearly show, tented communities. They show expertise in horsemanship, in smithing, like, to do with metallurgical substances they could craft for various kinds of weaponry. And they do show there are medieval woodcuts of what appeared to be healing temples that also were known as the light temples and the divine temples, as translated into the English language. But these white cities were not vast. Again, there's a lot of misapprehension and misunderstanding. These cities, so if you take it like the size of a city like London, you take the size of a city, for example, like Shenzhen in the People's Republic of China, or even the size of the greater metropolitan area of Moscow in Western Russia, or as it's known kind of officially as the Russian Federation. These are vast expanses, or Mexico City in Central America. Vast. The white cities of Tartaria were defined on their buildings of worship, the buildings of faith to do with the Christ awareness, defining it as a city state, but these were really urban communes.
Mm.
And we haven't ever really said in our Sacred Wisdom podcast that these are vast, rolling, expansive, huge urban conurbations. We've checked, we haven't got anything like that we've ever said or discussed. So I'm not sure where a lot of individuals are getting this information from, and then sort of saying that there's these sort of Tartarian emperors, which is just absolutely, it's crazy. And not only that, but the genetic and racial and ethnic background to some of these so-called Tartarian emperors that are listed in these diagrams that are circulating. They've been on social media platforms such as Facebook, and I think there's even some videos they've been put into on YouTube. And you think that's just insanity. And when we look at we discuss
people like sensationalism, Stephen. Just
like
saying,
sensationalism,
and that's the a problem with this subject is it's such a exciting subject for people to look at because it's a new discovery, the unknown, and I think people play on that, and they rear it up, and people get excited, and then that's why people.
So this sensationalism distorts actual credible research, and then it muddies and blurs and distorts that credible research, so that everything then just looks like some kind of absurd conspiracy theory. And then it's sidelined and ignored. So when we talk about the fact that the Nordic Tartarians and the Turkic peoples inhabited the resplendent white cities of like Mulgum and Bayada and Kambulik and Bargu in northern Tartaria, as within the Piasida region and the Jakuti region of northern Tartaria, and so on, where they were using electroculture to grow fruits, vegetables, and cereal crops. You didn't need a Tartarian emperor on some gold and silver laden throne, that had patterns of sparkling gemstones of rubies and sapphires and emeralds and amethysts or whatever to sort of impress the local populations of Nordic Tartarians and Turkic peoples. The way they lived was radically different. There was, as I said, no third-party debt usury system. There was no banking systems. There was no monetary systems, no financial systems in the white cities of Great Tartaria and the Old World Empire. They had free energy systems, as we've discussed extensively. And this is why so many of the antennae and metal roof grills on the apexes of hundreds and hundreds of stately mansions, government buildings, as well as what we would now class as chapels, churches, and cathedrals, many of which were built by the Roman Catholic Church, plus obviously the various Protestant church denominations, but many of them were reconfigured. They were taken over after the collapse of Great Tartaria and integrated, as happened within parts of the Russian Federation with the Russian Orthodox Church. So a lot of this has to be covered up because it doesn't fit the mindset of the policymakers, the elites, their secret societies, where humanity has to be kind of constantly imprinted and programmed, the idea with third-party debt usually with money, and this is the only way to exist because it's literally a control system with a capital C and a capital S. And so you can't measure what Tartaria as a civilization, whether it was known as Great Tartary or Great Tartaria, or whether it was known as Tartary or Tartaria, makes no difference. The Old World Empire, and so on, or whether it was connected directly or indirectly to the remnants of Hyperborea and the civilization of the Scythians and so on. You can't measure it or give it a parameter in terms of how you would define it against other civilizations because it was unique in its own right. I mean, you could, even with Nazi Germany as an example of something very odd, that was an occult dictatorship, but they still used money. They still had taxation. They still had, a banking system there. So, but even that in itself, that many individuals who are, mainstream academics know how bizarre the Third Reich was. It was absolutely insane what was going on. So obviously Tartaria was incredibly positive and immensely focused spiritually, dynamic civilization where the Christ awareness and the divine love of the universal creator was given absolutely imperative emphasis on a daily basis by all the Nordic Tartarians and the Turkic peoples. It really was a kind of a reversal of what had gone on under the suppression really of the Mongol Empire and the Golden Horde. That really didn't affect northern Russia. We have to remember geographically, Temujin Khan or Genghis Khan in the Golden Horde didn't really manage to get into the faraway north or the extreme north of the Arctic Circle and the Russian Arctic coast. Those areas were largely left untouched. Still, where there are much remnants of the Hyperborean pyramids, Hyperborean temples that still exist there, which the Russian Academy of Sciences and the Russian Geographical Society, as academic individuals holistically presented through those organizations, refused to do any funded excavations in terms of really developing Russian archaeology. So that's interesting to note as well. But that's aside from the fact there wasn't any.
Just going to say a note about speculation and people putting information out there. People in every way, every level of information, people need to be careful about what they're putting out. It's all very well. I think up crazy ideas, but I don't put every idea out on the internet because it's not just my idea. It's just a point of view. Be careful, because what this does is it creates a whole mess within other researchers and other pieces of information, and it creates.
Right.
It just reverberates and it eventually creates a dead end for whatever idea people want to convey and or concept people want to put across. So be very careful with just people speculating, and look at information, look at history. It's not all a lie. There is historical evidence to prove that certain things happened. And when you look at them key moments, you can start getting a broader picture and understanding to it all. And so Steve, tell us.
Yeah, I'll just say, if you get like the president of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin, or and the other individuals in the State Duma in Moscow saying, "Oh, Great Tartaria and the Old World Empire is an absolute extremist myth," they're immediately relating it to some kind of modern day political a grouping of individuals who've hijacked or taken that information for their own belief systems. Now, nothing that about Great Tartaria has anything to do with left politics or right politics, to do with anything at all, and nothing to do with any of it. It was a thoroughly multicultural civilization, and it wasn't based on ethnicity. It was based on specific spiritual tenets or spiritual principles, as I've said hundreds and hundreds of times, to do with the Christ awareness. It wasn't involved in biblical Christianity. That's one version, and the teachings of Yeshua ben Yosef, or Yeshua HaMashiach, the Lord Jesus Christ, are a universal law or cosmic law, really, and they'd apply, not just here on planet Earth, but across countless star systems in the Milky Way galaxy, or even elsewhere in the Sagittarius dwarf spheroidal galaxy, or across even the entirety of well over 4,500 trillion galactic planes in this physical universe, in the material dimension. The eloquence of Great Tartaria or Great Tartaria was only based on spiritual development of the Nordic Tartarians and the Turkic peoples and other groups as well. The Sami or the Laplanders were also involved in that, and other Finno-Ugric groups to a lesser extent. But it was really about the Christ awareness and divine love towards the universal creator. It can't be measured as a civilization in a way it wasn't a civilization that we could measure in terms of parameters, such as with, say, the Greek civilization or the Roman Empire. It was totally different. And that's known. So it's difficult to really kind of say, yes, there is going to be overwhelming crate loads or plastic container loads of documented evidence that's hidden away in some part of the archives at the Russian Academy of Sciences in Moscow. It wasn't, and there was so much destruction that took place with the first mud flood, the second mud flood, the third mud flood, that were horrific, really, over a very long period, as we discussed extensively in previous Sacred Wisdom podcasts in northern Russia, as well as other parts of planet Earth. But there was a huge amount of deletion and eradication of what you would need as credible kinds of evidence to confirm it was a civilization. And that needs to be taken into account. Of course, it isn't, because it helps with the fact they can just ignore it ever existed. So
It's
But
quite
when it
convenient
comes to the
for the West to feel like
yeah,
it never existed. So, yeah. So,
yeah,
Steve, now going on to the leaders. So, you've got a few names and various people that
yeah.
you've kind of brought together. So,
So I took this list, like that was being used, and it makes me laugh because when you take a look at this list, it's ludicrous, really. And so, for example, the first individual that is listed as, I suppose, the founding uh, uh, emperor of Great Tartaria is listed actually in Genesis 10:2. It's Magog ben Japheth. He was the progeny or son of Japheth ben Noach, and he's mentioned in what's known as the Motzi Anishim, or the people's origin. In the Latin, it's known as the Origines Gentium, or the people's origin, or commonly known in the lingua anglica, or the English language, as the Table of Nations. There is zero historical narratives to prove that Magog ben Japheth somehow migrated into northern Russia to be the founder of early Tartaria or Great Tartaria. And that individual, Magog ben Japheth, actually existed from 2910 BC to 2584 BC. So he reached the grand old age of 326 years old. How on earth an individual would take a biblical patriarch from Genesis 10:2 and pretend he was an emperor of Tartaria is so completely nuts. I can't even say any more. It's
but Steve, the
ludicrous,
Tartaria didn't
really.
exist. It didn't exist at that time period.
I know. That's
What
why I've
went on?
given these. I mean, every one of them has got a birth and death date.
I haven't seen it. So you came across it.
So you've got the Sumerian king called Gilgamesh, Lugal-Bandak, who is described in the Epic of Gilgamesh by the Babylonian scribe called Sinleki-un-Nini. Now, Gilgamesh, Lugal-Bandak, the Sumerian king of Unug or Uruk. The city-state of Unug or Uruk was located around the Euphrates River and the Tigris River in the Middle East. Gilgamesh Lugal-Bandak apparently existed from around 2395 BC into 2301 BC and reached the grand old age of 94 years old. Again, where is any credible evidence of him being connected to Great Tartaria?
Yeah, very weird. Yeah, that's really, really weird, actually. I mean, that's
These individuals, and he's semi-mythical, by the way. Gilgamesh Lugal-Bandak has never been actually proven by Middle Eastern archaeology,
yeah,
research done by any individuals in the Department of Archaeology, say at Oxford University or Cambridge University in the United Kingdom or anywhere else, as actually having existed. So a semi-mythical character who was a Sumerian king now suddenly becomes a Tartarian emperor of northern Russia. Absolute madness, absolutely ridiculous.
that is insane. That is really
It
crazy.
is insane. Now we're coming on to the third one, and in the book of Samuel of the Holy Bible, there's an individual known as Shlomo ben Dawid, also known as Solomon ben David, also known as Jedediah ben Dawid, and also known as Jedediah ben David or King David. He
Right.
became the second king of Israel. Essentially, it reads in 1 Samuel 16:13, then Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brethren. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon David from that day forward. So Samuel rose up and went to Ramah. So this individual, known as King David or Solomon ben David or Shlomo ben Dawid or whatever, he existed from 982 BC to 915 BC and reached the age of 67 years old. So it's getting more ludicrous now. And these are all individuals listed as Tartarian emperors in northern Russia.
It's crazy. Like, I don't understand, because the time period is completely out of sync with the actual Tartarian Empire anyway. So I don't
Yes.
understand how it's
Right. And
acknowledged. I mean, at least put make sure they're alive. The people weren't even alive when.
well, there's a JPEG or PNG image of these kings. Somebody's obviously gone to maybe a graphic designer on Fiverr.com or a similar vendor type platform and asked one of the vendors there to design, and they've done all these little graphic sort of portraits of the names of these Tartarian emperors and given them these names.
Mm.
And then some of the names have been slightly changed to obscure the fact that they're actually historical figures. Now, this is
Wow.
one of the funniest ones. The profound rulership of Emperor King Shi Huan meant he became the Cathay Emperor, that's Western China,
Yeah.
the first emperor of dynastic China, that's the whole of mainland China. The
Okay.
Emperor King Shi Huan was born in Handan, the capital of Zhao State, which became the Hebei province in northern China. He was born as Emperor King Shui Huang, existed from 259 BC until 210 BC and reached the age of 49 years old. So, how on earth is the
So
founding
funny.
emperor of dynastic China got
Right.
anything to do
Yeah.
with the Tartarian emperors? That never existed anyway. This is out there now, and this has gone on, as I said, on Facebook as JPEG and PNG image formats. It's now being used in various YouTube videos. This is absolute. This is what I'm saying about credible research. Then gets muddied and blurred in with all this complete massive disinformation, and perhaps it's even actually misinformation, and therefore meaning it's being deliberately done, intentionally done.
Or somebody
So
has no remorse and doesn't care, and they just literally want to put it out there in, yeah.
I
I
think
mean,
they're just trying to make a name for themselves, trying to get out there on as many YouTube, channels as possible, and put their details out as though if you type in names of individuals connected to Great Tartary or Great Tartaria in the Old World Empire, then suddenly they become the next sort of fake expert on the subject.
now,
We've never said we're experts on that subject. We don't do that. We have integrity, and we've never changed the parameters of what we are talking about through the Sacred Wisdom podcast to do with Great Tartaria and the Old World Empire. And as you know, that many of our viewers salute us for that integrity, because we do keep very focused on the information.
mhm.
So
So
his,
Steve,
his,
but
his
Steve, just on a note, when I did the books of Tartaria and I went through all the books and we shared all that information, it was around the 15th, 16th century. There was the Prince of Fife. Sorry, the
that's
Prince of Tartaria visited Fife in Scotland. And
mm,
there is a little account. It's very hard to read because it's a very
right.
different type of English. So I didn't know the exact name of that person, but there is identically some sort of aristocrat connection, if you like.
So in Great Tartaria, there were kings, there were queens, and there were princes. There was no emperors. There was no Tartarian Empire, with where you had a sort of emperor living in northern Russia who ruled the civilization across planet Earth.
Okay, it's so yeah, it gets very confusing that I think for people. I think people misunderstand it. So do you have any names on who the kings and queens were?
No, because again, it was a civilization that was constructed in that way. It wasn't, as with the healing temples or light temples and divine temples, the white cities and everything, it was a totally different kind of banking system or a monetary system or a financial system. You don't have third party debt usury. That means the entire psychological outlook of the Nordic Tatarians and the Turkic peoples, who were kind of nomadic and pastoral, was radically different. So that would also mean the monarchy would be very different as well. So recording such things didn't seem to be a major issue, like having to have annals or archived records.
Yeah, yeah, and as we said earlier, anybody that researches this subject, and they get kind of wild ideas. Just be wary of putting them out and putting them out without backing up that information, because when you put stuff out, it spreads, and sensationalism, it can be a very dangerous thing sometimes, and this is what you kind of have to have some grounding to it. And I think
Yeah.
it's worth you know do everybody that looks at information, it's really important that we research that certain people will take a Facebook post, and this is the real problem. They take
Mm.
things for face value, so they just take a Facebook post and they'll read into it, that being the truth, that being the facts, and then relay that information to someone
Yeah.
else.
Yeah.
But really,
So we
it
have
was.
other individuals, Zach, that are listed in these JPEG and PNG format kind of imagery, and again, it just goes on being completely ludicrous. So, from Damascus in southwestern Syria and the Levant of the eastern Mediterranean, that the Chalcedonian Christian priest known as Yohanan Slabazka Hadabui became respected by many Syrian Arabs. He was defined as Prester John Presbyter Ioannis, John the Presbyter of Syria, Anathan of the Inner Sanctum, and a Nestorian patriarch. Now, this individual, Yohanan Slabazka Hadabui, existed from 493 AD to 412 AD, and he reached the grand old age of 81 years old, but he never once traveled into northern Russia. There are no documented evidences.
So, Steve, there are more people apparently as well. So there's more that go on in this list, isn't there?
There are indeed other fake Tartarian emperors. So apart from the ludicrous idea that the Turkic Sultan of the Great Seljuk Empire, Muhammad al-Aslan Abin Dawi Chagri Seljuk, was actually a Tartarian emperor, it's now been claimed that Temujin Khan Borjigin or Genghis Khan Borjigin or Genghis Khan Borjigin was also a Tartarian emperor. He was actually the leader of the Mongol Empire and the Golden Horde. Temujin Khan Borjigin or Genghis Khan Borjigin or Genghis Khan Borjigin was also defined as Temujin the Pacifier, but he had no connection to the Arctic Circle or northern Russia, and he existed from 1162 AD to 1227 AD and reached the age of 65 years old. So no, he wasn't a Tartarian emperor either, but he did help by default with the collapse of the Mongol Empire and the Golden Horde to actually indirectly found or developed the basis of early Tartary or early Tartaria that became Great Tartaria or Great Tartaria in the Old Empire.
There's so much information and history that it's very difficult to really say what is. But the problem is that all this misinformation, and when you're not going by certain factual information, we're not conveying, and we're just creating more distortion in this reality, and we're just going by his story. What we already know is a distortion in our past, and we
That's
don't
right.
need to distort that anymore.
So absolutely. So on to the last two individuals that were given the title of Tartarian Emperor by certain conspiracy theorists who shall remain nameless. And in this JPEG and PNG image that's on Facebook and on various YouTube channels. So another individual was Kublai Khan Borjigin. He was never a Tartarian emperor. And for some reason, individuals have linked Shudai Renwen Yiwu, who was the first emperor of the Yuan dynasty in eastern China. He was also never called Kublai Tsar by the Mongolian tribes or the Chinese people either. And Kublai Khan Borjigin existed from 1215 AD to 1294 AD, reaching the age of 79 years old. Again, he never existed in the Arctic Circle or northern Russia or any aspects or geographic locations of the Old World Empire. Again, complete disinformation is being put out there by certain individuals. And then we have the last individual,
Donald Trump.
He was the claimed. So we have this Tartarian emperor, and that was the Turco-Mongol prince called Timur Pesar Taragay, also known as Tamerlane Pesar Taragay, Shuja Udin Timur, and Shahabi Karan Amir Timur Gurkhani. He never had any colony in Russia, certainly not in the Arctic Circle, and therefore nowhere near the Arctic North Polar region. Had nothing really to do with the old empire. And we have to remember that Great Tartaria or Great Tartaria was non-political, was completely inclusional, it was multi-faith and obviously quite multi-ethnic. And therefore there wasn't these kind of boundaries between, well, this is ours and that's yours. The Tartarian flag, whether it was the Tartarian owl for the Nordic Tartarians and the Turkic peoples, the Tartarian griffin for the Tartarian royalty, was an inclusional, shall we say, cultural identity as those symbols presented to the individuals, the inhabitants, Nordic Tartarians and the Turkic peoples. And so there wouldn't have been any conflict of interest with Timur Pesar Taragay or Tamerlane Pesar Taragay at all. With that kind of civilization, there wasn't any interactions that have been seen in the historical narratives either, where he tried to invade northern Russia or the Arctic Circle. So again, a lot of disinformation. And we do know that he became the founder of the Timurid Empire in around Persia, Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and most of Central Asia. But Timur Pesar Taragos, and as Tamerlane Pesar Taragay, Shuja Udin Timur, and Shihabi Kiran Amir Timur Kurgani, was never called Timur Uz, the Geomancer king, by any of the Persians, Afghanistanis, Turkmenistanis, Uzbekistanis, or any other Central Asians. Again, complete disinformation. There's no such historical character as Timur Uz, the Geomancer king. Total, complete misinformation actually going on.
It's a real
but
problem.
We can say that
Yeah.
It is indeed. And we do know that Timur Pesar Taragos, and as Tamerlane Pesar Taragay, existed from 1327 AD to 1405 AD, and he reached the age of 78 years old, and again was not a Tartarian emperor. And that's the end of that, really.
Well, so, yeah, thank you, Stephen. Thank you for clarifying all that. It's a lot. It's a big subject, and a lot of people kind of speculate on it, and then they put that speculation into fact. And you have to be very careful, because if we do that, we're just adding to the his story, the version of history that we don't want, and that is the distortion. So, it's all very well coming out with ideas, and like we do, and theories. And as some of you know, I can be quite wacky with some of my ideas. So I do come out with things, but I do say this is my ideas. I don't put it across or I put it across in something creative. It's very important that we do this, and that's what we're trying to get across in this podcast, is so you understand that that's contributing to the distortion, and we don't want to do that. There's a big split in reality at the moment, and that split seems to have happened in alternative media as well, and this is due to these kind of reasons where misinformation is put in, and a conspiracy or an idea just becomes this fabricated reality. But Stephen, thank you for that information. It's been brilliant research as always, and your knowledge is so appreciated by everybody on the channel and anybody else watching. I know they really appreciate it as well. So you can also purchase our book. This is Vanished Kingdoms. It's available on Amazon in paperback and ebook. You can also purchase that through my site and a few other locations online. And for now, and Stephen, just to say thank you so much for that brilliant information. All right, and
you're welcome, Zach.
Excellent. And for now, it's bye for me.
And it's goodbye from me.